This video is going to talk about the reunification of China after the collapse of the Zhou dynasty and then moving into the Warring States period. Now, this is really the dilemma that people are faced with. What do people do when they're in this state where there's no political unity and there's basically fighting between different groups? There's invasions from outsiders, especially the Xiongnu. So how do people respond? What's the best philosophy when you have no political unity for you to be able to move forward on a unified front? And so that's the question. So this presentation is going to look at three different philosophies that in many ways were a response to the Warring States period. And people looked at each of these very differently about this could be the solution to this problem of disunity. And so as we are looking at this today, the first school of thought that we're going to look at is Confucianism. And so this is one of the responses, this is one of the ideals that came out of this period of time. Now, Confucianism, which makes sense, is based off Confucius's teachings. Now, Confucius was known as Confuci. He was born during the time when the Zhou dynasty was declining and then into the Warring States period. And so his ideas were basically this idea that he has a way to bring order to society, and he really sought after different political positions. And so he was looking to basically have political power, and he would be able to bring people together. Now, he never really obtained any of those positions, unfortunately, and so he turned to be a good old teacher like us. But he turns to be a teacher, and a lot of people then followed after him and became his disciples and listened to his teachings. And so that's kind of the founding of Confucianism, the practice of Confucius, whenever we look at ISM words. And so the Analects then became what Confucius's sayings and teachings were. Now, these were written down by his followers, not by Confucius himself. And the beliefs within the Analects are very practical. They're not religious. They're not necessarily about a deity or a supernatural. It was really just practical, everyday life. How do you keep order? How do you live a good life? And so within the Analects, you have these teachings of Confucius. And so the values, if you were to kind of sum up, what are these teachings? He came up with these major ideas. Ren, which is this Chinese value of kindness. Li, which is basically manners or acting correctly in the situation that you are in. And then filial piety, which goes back to this idea of respect for elders, respect for people that have more power than you, your parents. This idea of really kind of venerating those people who you should give respect to. And this really goes into Confucius's 5 key relationships, and you'll want to know these. And it's basically all based on, for the first 4, about authority. And so since the ruler to subject relationship, the ruler had power over the subject, and the subject had to give basically respect to the ruler, and that will bring order. Now the same thing goes for the father to the son. The father being the superior and the son being the lesser in this relationship. Older brother to younger brother, knowing larger family size, older brother, we see this throughout history, has more power within families. Husband to wife, again, the wife being subservient to the husband being superior. We talked about patriarchal societies. And then the only one that doesn't have this kind of authority figure to it is really friend to friend. And these 5 key relationships bring society together and create order when you respect basically the superior in these relationships. And ultimately, all of it goes down to this idea that family is the most important unit in Chinese society. And if you revere those who are more powerful than you, who are in these superior places, you will then create order. If kids always listen to their parents, and if people always listen to their rulers, we'd have order in society. And so this is the ideas of Confucianism. Now, if we look at kind of what is their idea to the problem of disorder, this disunity, we're going to see that their solution, if you're a Confucianist, you would say that good government is based on educated officials and these conscientious moral officials. So basically, if we educate people well, they will then lead well, and the positions within the government that they have. And then we need to respect the social hierarchies and traditions that are in place. If we do these things, there will be order and unity brought to China. And so these were the ideas of Confucianism. And so that's the first thing on the table. Would this be the one that brings order or not? We'll come to that a little bit later. The second major school of thought is Taoism. You might have heard of this before. You might have seen it spelled with a T. It is the same thing. So Taoism, the practice of, if we look at ISM, the practice of the Tao. And so what does that mean? So Lao Tzu is going to be this somewhat historical, somewhat legendary figure who is going to, quote-unquote, write the Daodejing. The Daodejing is going to be like the Analects. This is going to kind of explain the beliefs of Taoism. Now, if you're going to look at the beliefs of Taoism, one, you need to understand what the Tao is. The Tao is like the way of nature, the way of the cosmos. And sometimes it was spoken of kind of passively, kind of negatively, like you don't want to challenge the Tao. And so your goal in life is to live in harmony with the Tao, with nature, to kind of be one with that. And so in some ways, in our heads and 21st century people, we think, and if this helps you at all, kind of like the Force within Star Wars. Like, you want to be one with the Force. And so if that helps you connect a little bit to this idea, that seems a little harder to connect with. So the values of Taoism is this principle of Wu Wei, to act by not acting, which is kind of an interesting way to look at that. They believed firmly in this refraining from education. They believed in like a simplistic life and self-sufficient communities. And so in some ways, and you'll look in the textbook, and Strayer talks about how if there is like a dog barking in the distance, like it's of no concern to you, that you should just care about your local self-sufficient communities. And so we'll see these ideas of Taoism. You might have been familiar with the yin and yang symbol. But basically that opposite forces are actually complementary. And so we'll see that like men and women like balance each other out. Fire and water, light and darkness. So these are actually complementary features. And so that's one other concept of Taoism. We also see that Taoism focuses a lot on herbal medicines, natural medicines, things like acupuncture, again, because you need to become one with nature. And so obviously these more natural remedies, natural ways of dealing with pain and suffering would make sense within Taoism. And so when we're looking at this ideal, very different than Confucianism, we're going to see that the solution to the warring states is different, in that cease trying to fix this disunity and kind of this separated state, because we don't necessarily need a unified dynasty that rules over. We should live as simply as possible. We should live according to the Tao. We need less government and just be able to kind of live off the land in our self-sufficient, simple communities. And so very different as we look at Taoism and their kind of response to this warring states period. Now, the third idea is legalism. So the practice of, and we're really looking at legalism, we want to really look at, first of all, this idea that they would say, if you're a legalist, you would say, basically, there's an evil nature about humans. Humans, by nature, are selfish. They are in it for themselves. And so the only way to get selfish people to follow the laws is for it to be clear, strict laws. So that's where we get the word legalist. And there should be harsh penalties. So if you break the rules, you should be punished severely. If you steal with your hand, then cut off your hand. And then people in the future won't want to steal, because that's a pretty harsh punishment. That's legalist beliefs. Again, this is not based on any religion. It is just kind of a way to keep order in society. And so a legalist even would say that there are two important positions in society: the military and the farmers. Basically, everybody else, artists, teachers, everything else besides those that are in the military or are farmers, are not important roles in society. The legalist says basically the people in power in the military and everybody else. Those are the two roles of society. Now, one of the key philosophers that came up with this idea is Han Fei, and he basically said that wrote this idea about legalism. He's known for saying, here's one of his quotes, if rewards are high, then what the ruler wants will be quickly effected. If punishments are heavy, what he does not want will be swiftly prevented. And so when we're looking at this, it is really all going to be about strict rules, strict penalties, very harsh. And then if you do this and reward people for good behavior, then the policies will put an end to the warring states period. And when we're looking at these three different schools of thought, like which one actually brought people out of the warring states period, not to ruin it, but it's going to be legalism. And then we're going to see after that was really rough for a while and super strict, they're going to transition away from super strict legalism and really embracing Confucianism. Meanwhile, Taoism will be kind of a complementary other belief system that's going to be within China. So when we're looking at these different ideas, these different philosophies, it's super important that you understand all three of these and the differences between them.